Hey, we're going to talk about Oklahoma's diverse land. It's probably one of the most diverse lands that you'll ever see in the United States. Probably the only state that has a little bit more diversity into its um, land is Alaska. No other state can match us with our diversity. A lot of people say that, Oklahoma is flat and not really um, interesting. But if you really get out into it, it really is. When you really get to it, it's broken up into 10 different geographical regions. And if you just by looking at the geographical regions, you can kind of get an idea of what each group is like. And all the way from the high plains, which is actually a high elevation automatically, all the way down the corner. Now, Oklahoma sits on a diagonal slope all the way from the southeastern corner up to the top of the panhandle. So you actually go about 4 to 5,000 feet in elevation from where if you were to drive from Tom, Oklahoma, all the way up to Kenton, Oklahoma. And so that's what Oklahoma sits on. So we're going to start off talking about the Ozark Plateau. And what is a plateau? A plateau is actually a strong point into the geography. When you look at mountains, it means they were a weak point. That two sides or two plates had pushed into it and it gave in, and it starts to rise and gives this majestic power. But actually, mountains are weak. They broke somewhere. A plateau doesn't actually break; it just rises. And over the long period of time, the actual erosion and rain, snow, ice, all the stuff you can imagine actually breaks down all the land to where it's basically what you see right here. And so the hard parts are still there, give you an illusion of what it could be mountains. But if you actually look at the rock layers, they are flat, giving them a idea of what is a mountains or something. But a plateau is actually a strong point in the land. And so this Ozark Plateau is mostly in Missouri and northern Arkansas, and it jots into the area of Oklahoma. And so anytime it jots into our state, we talk about it. Like the Fort Smith area, anywhere from like Sallisaw, Oklahoma, into Fort Smith, you're going to be going through what's called the Boston Mountains. And this is the area still part of this plateau. People call things mountains, and I'll argue this later on if you want to, why Oklahoma has mountains and people like from other states do not really call it mountains because they look at the number. Um, but the Boston Mountains are very much right in that area. It's very forested. It's got a lot of rivers and even some of this area, you can say they have Bigfoot festivals. But these are the Boston Mountains. In the very bottom part of the Boston Mountains, you have this thing right here. And a lot of people don't know we have this. And it's actually a flaw um, that somebody discovered. And it's not something that they came out and said this. This actually came from a bunch of surveyors that came from England, came through here and discovered this. This is actually called Kavanaugh Hill. It's the world's tallest hill, and it's 1 foot away from being a mountain. And I've had more students say, "Well, why don't you just add a foot and have the shortest mountain?" And I always say, "What's cooler, the highest hill or the smallest mountain?" And that's up to you. But still, it is today the world's highest hill. It's if you do go climb that thing, you will have sore legs, even though you call it a hill. But it's under 2,000 feet, and 2,000 feet is actually a mountain. Now let's get into the argument that people, my friends from Colorado, say, Oklahoma doesn't have mountains, you have little bitty hills. It's not fair when Colorado is from one point to all the way to the other point. Every bit of Colorado is taller than Oklahoma because it sits on top of the continental divide. It sits up on top of the continent itself. So every bit of it. So if you go to Denver, Denver sits in the plains, and when you sit in the plains, you're right outside the mountains. Yet it's known as the Mile High State, I mean, Mile High City. And with its the Mile High City, it sits up, 5,000 feet It's higher than anything in Oklahoma. So if you put this outside of Denver, Colorado, in the plains, you've got almost a 7,000-foot mountain. And all of a sudden, it's the number. Oh my gosh, this is like wow, it's a mountain now because it's in Colorado and it's 7,000 feet instead of the 1,999 feet in Oklahoma. So the thing is, it's how much elevation sits underneath it. If you stick all of the mountains in Oklahoma from Colorado, they will lose probably the majority of their number from what the base of the mountain is to the top. Now, they are majestic and they are gorgeous, and there's nothing like that in Oklahoma. I'll tell you that. But to just basically make that declaration that there's nothing in Oklahoma that's worth looking at because Colorado has the mountains. You put Pikes Peak in Oklahoma, and you've got an 8,000-foot mountain. So if you really kind of look at it, it's not fair to compare by the numbers. Everybody's all about numbers. You know, I have more money than you. I have more points than you. But if you look at it with, I guess you could say, a handicap, then you're going to find that Oklahoma actually has mountains. And if you go climb mountains in Colorado and New Mexico and climb mountains in Oklahoma, you're going to soon figure out real quick, hey, these are just as tough as anywhere else you go. Going on south, you're going to run into the Ouachita Mountains. And this is the part of Oklahoma that a lot of people don't really recognize. This is actually the same uplift as the Appalachian Mountains. They were actually attached at one time, but the Mississippi River washed out the middle part that would have connected them. So this is the outside of it. It's one of the oldest mountain ranges around is the Ouachita Mountains, and it's gorgeous. If you ever get a chance to go there, it is. There's lots of places to go hiking and get lost. And if you look at it on a map, some places of it, it's not really. There's not a lot of places you can actually get to because it's so rugged, and so some of the roads are probably roads you don't really want to go down. But the Ouachita Mountains are very gorgeous, and if you were to look at pictures like this and say that's Oklahoma, people laugh at you and go, that's not Oklahoma. It has water, it has cliffs, and it has beautiful trees. Oklahoma's flat, and there's my theme through this whole thing is because if you were to hear me in class, this is exactly what it's all about. One of the historical roads that comes through here, through the winding stair mountains, it's called the Talalena Drive, and it goes over the top of the winding stair mountains from Tallahena, Oklahoma to Mena, Arkansas. And if you ever get a chance to go, it's gorgeous, it's fun. A lot of people like to do it in the fall because all the trees turn, and so driving over this, you can see all the different colors. And so they do foliage tours there. But the Talalena Drive is very much a historical drive in Oklahoma that is down in eastern Oklahoma in the Ouachita Mountains. If you go up to Tulsa, it sits on what's called the Prairie Plains, and this is where you get, the two major cities of Oklahoma sit on plains. And this is it's a very rich and dark soil. It goes all the way north up into Kansas. It's mostly used for farming and dairy. And some of the areas up there still have some of the grasslands that they had way back when. And so and here's the thing, why do we have to have mountains to find beauty in things? Just realize you can find beauty in anything, even a desert. So this is some of the parts of the north of Tulsa that you would find the Prairie Plains. They actually have up by Pawhuska, they have the tall grass prairie up there. That's a natural refuge up there for that. And even there, you can find some very scenic looks. If you drive from Oklahoma City to Tulsa, it goes up and down and up and up, up and down and up and down. And that is what you're going to find is the sandstone hills. It's full of oil. So what we're going to discover there is you're going to find the Drumright Field, the Cushing Field, the Sapulpa, all this area. It's full of oil. So the sand, over a long period of time, has accumulated all of the dead animals and plants over a long period of time and sunk it down. And eventually, over millions of years, it turns into an oil or petroleum. And this is where you're going to find a lot of this. The Arbuckle Mountains is another area that gets made fun of a lot because really there's not much to the Arbuckle Mountains. They're very small. There's not much left of them, and they're technically not mountains anymore. But as I told you earlier, if you were to look right here at the rock layers themselves, they are diagonal, meaning that they are mountains. The thing about the Arbuckle Mountains is that they are some of the oldest mountains on Earth. And if you look at the top here, this is called the graveyard, and it's the tops of the mountains right there. And a lot of geologists like to go study this because you can see the tops of all the different rock layers over a long period of time. So if you kind of look at this in a roundabout way, there is a lot here. Now let me see if I can show you this real quick. This is a friend of mine is a pilot. Actually, it's my nephew, and I'll try to show you this. He took this picture for me. Let me try to find a good. Okay, this right here where I'm going to show you. You see that right there? That's I-40, and so you're going. This is where over here is where Ardmore is. You're going through the mountains right here. This is where over here is where False Creek is. But if you look like this right here, you see that? That is the fault line that created the Arbuckle Mountains. And so you really don't see it from the ground because when you drive down this road right here, going into Ardmore, you really don't notice it. And there's a lot of things that's kind of neat about it if you look at it. But from the air, you can totally see the fault line that created the mountains. And it's kind of cool to see that, especially if you were to go in the air and look at it. But that is the fault line right there that created the Arbuckle Mountains. The Arbuckles are neat because they're some of the oldest mountains in the world. They used to be over 20,000 feet tall, and they're actually volcanic. The one with the tower on the top of it is actually a dormant volcano, and actually one of the veins of that volcano that came out actually created Turner Falls. We would not have Turner Falls if it wasn't for that vein of volcanic rock that created the wall that the water would come across. Kind of neat to go look at this stuff. If you go over to, if you keep going over to the Lawton area, you'll find the Wichita Mountains. The Wichita Mountains are totally formed, totally different than any other mountains that we've looked at so far. What happened is magma has risen up underneath the ground, creating a very hard rock called granite. And so over a long period of time, the granite's been, the top of the layers above the granite has been worn down. And so what you see are the granite peaks. And this is actually the top of the third tallest mountain in the Wichita Mountains is Mount Scott. It's the one that everybody goes upon. There's two more, Mount Pinshot and Mount Haley, which are on the other side, which are actually on private land, which are the two tallest peaks in the Wichita Mountains. But this is also a place you can find a lot of cool, like hiking areas, rappelling. You can do all kinds of stuff there. And I strongly suggest if you ever get a weekend, go goof off and have fun. Be careful. Do not play with the buffalo or the elk. Stay away from them. And even the longhorn cattle, don't even get near those. Those things look like they're going to hurt you. Now keep going west, you'll run into what is called the Quartz Mountains. And the Quartz Mountains are the same exact thing that you find with the Wichita Mountains, but they are smaller. And unless you get over by Lake Altus, and King Mountain is just as big as anything else you see. But the Quartz Mountains are kind of cool because they're smaller around that area. The Red River Plains are from Lake Texoma all the way to the corner where Arkansas and Texas meet. This is a wet soil that's got high rainfall. It's probably one of the higher rainfall amounts that you find in Oklahoma. It's also where you have cypress bayous. And cypress bayous is where you can find alligators. Now the guy on the right is my picture, and I got him out of the water by throwing him Cheez-It crackers. And I think he would have gotten in the car if he would have kept coming. I didn't want him in the car though. But anyway. What you're looking at is the red bed plains. It's what you're sitting on. It's red dirt. It's got a lot of iron oxide in it that I'm going to tell you here in a second. But anyway, that is a very fertile soil that you find from all the way to South Texas, all the way to the northern part of Saskatchewan, and that's why they give them the red dirt is because it's been rusting, and the oxide, the rust in it, actually the iron makes it very fertile, and that's why it's one of the bread baskets of the United States. Um, in the far north, and yes, that's my car in the middle, well, my old car. We have a Great Salt Plains, and it's the remnants of a huge salt sea. There's still a lake up there, and it still has tons of salt, and it's not the kind of salt you put on your table, but it is salt. And there's actually about 3 or 4 salt plains in Oklahoma. This is just the big ones. If you look on Google Earth and you just go up and down the river, you can see that there's a couple more salt plains in Oklahoma. But this is the big one, the one you can go out and find. And if you actually look in the veins of these places, you can find that that salt is gypsum. There is a state park up north of Fairview called the Glass Mountains, which has a lot of this gypsum in it. And if you actually look at it, it actually has a glittery side and then it's a rough side. And if you ever see it in the sunlight, you can see it why they call it the Glass Mountains. Also, in the same area, you can find an area called the Little Sahara Desert. It's not actually a desert. What happened is the Cimarron River switched its um, trail, left a huge pit of sand, and the winds of the area pushed it up on the hill. And so what you have is this huge amount of sand that's been blown up on top of it. And a long time ago, like the city of Winoka actually put like a couple of camels out there as a gesture, and people started going out and doing ATVs and dune buggies and everything. Gypsum is a pink or it could be a white rock that they ground up, put it in a bunch of different things. They put it in plaster. They put it in drywall, like in your bedroom. If you ever hit a hole in the wall, it will be white. They also even put it in Twinkies, but still eat Twinkies. They're good. Now, far up in the corner is the high plains, and basically from Woodward on up into the Panhandle. These are the highest elevations of Oklahoma, and it goes all the way up to um, Nebraska, South Dakota, and this is an area of that they call the Great American Desert, even though it's not really a desert, and we'll talk about it after a while. But these are the high plains. The highest point in Oklahoma is Black Mesa. This is not the picture of it. You are standing on top of it, and it's a vein from a huge volcano that's actually in Colorado. So you can see it on the top and see what it lies volcanic. But that's Black Mesa, our highest point, and that's the actual highest point on top of Black Mesa. You can hike to it. It's about a 4 mile hike. There's some dinosaur footprints, kind of cool to see at the base. That's my daughter in them. Yay. Okay. These are called the Antelope Hills, which are south of there. Trying to figure out where if you go to Cheyenne and head north, Cheyenne, you can see the Antelope Hills. They're actually pretty high in elevation. If you look at the numbers, they're in the 2000s. But this is part of the high plains too. And that's basically the end of this whole thing. And so we're done.